Welcome, one and all, to the Ferret Raccoon podcast, episode 228. I am your one and only host for this podcast, the Angry Raccoon, bringing you another podcast for October 2023. And things have been quite unfortunate over the last 2 weeks. Some of the more recent and more impactful things that have happened, I'm not going to discuss right now because they're just a little bit upsetting for the most part, and I don't really want to bring the mood of the podcast down immediately. I'm sure for anyone living through 2023 during October probably knows what I mean, especially if you just look it up, but it is extremely saddening to hear and know about, and I just hope that these situations and these problems and these events, as they were, do hopefully come to a very peaceful end. But I have a very interesting podcast for you, quite a small one once again, sort of October-ish, but very seasonal for the most part. But one of the things I did over the last 2 weeks, because I'm actually getting back into doing things and kind of taking my life back and enjoying things, is I was continuing to play Resident Evil 4 Remake, of course, the Separate Ways DLC, which came out about 3 weeks ago at this point, maybe a month ago, I'm not too sure, depending on when you're listening to this. And I essentially decided I wanted to platinum or re-platinum the game again by beating the Separate Ways DLC on professional mode with an S+ rank. And boy, was that probably one of the worst things I've done this year. That was just straight up unfair for the most part. And it really shows the flaws of the game, especially when it comes to the boss battles for the most part. You have to beat the game in you have to beat it in under 2.5 hours to get the S+ rank on professional mode, and you can only save 10 times. And to say I was cutting it close is an understatement, because I think I beat the game at about 2 hours, 28 minutes. And this is because I didn't plan well enough, and the game doesn't really give you the resources to survive for the most part. One of the more baffling choices the DLC does make is that the first thing you do is fight a boss, and you are given very limited resources and very limited options, to the point where originally when I played it, I thought you had to die to this boss because it was near impossible. It's a bit ridiculous, and there are other boss battles that just kind of drain your resources, and you never feel like you're prepared or that it's a challenge. It always feels like a struggle, which I don't think is how you should go about any kind of boss battle for the most part. It should always feel like an obstacle that you can and will overcome, even if it takes a little bit of practice. But with these boss battles, it didn't feel like practice at all. One thing that really annoyed me as well was I was actually, without spoiling anything, I literally had 30 seconds left of the DLC before I'd beaten it on professional, and no joke, I randomly got blown up and it killed my run, which is incredibly annoying because it set me back a good 15 minutes of struggling, and then it took me another hour to then get back to that point because I had once again put myself in a very unfortunate situation. But I would still recommend the DLC despite its flaws. I've also been playing the Mercenaries because that got a free update. So obviously if you don't want to go and play the Separate Ways DLC and you have the game, you can just get the free update for Mercenaries, adding technically 2, but overall 4 new characters in one map. The new map in and of itself, I'm not going to say its name because it's a spoiler, is just overly difficult. It's just not fun to play at all. I know they wanted to make it like the hardest map or a challenge, but it's just not fun at all. Not when you put the most annoying enemies right there. And yeah, I think the new characters are fine. You get another version of Leon who is not that great because he has a very inaccurate gun. You have a version or 2 versions of Ada. Ada's a lot of fun, although she's very limited. Her melee attacks sometimes just don't kill, which destroys your combo. And the other character, I'm not going to say who it is because it's technically a spoiler, is super overpowered but a lot of fun to play. I essentially grinded out Mercenaries over the last week and essentially managed to get the RPD Leon skin, which is what you get for getting S+ rank on all the maps. So that was a fun little incentive, which takes you about 4 hours. So hey, more content. I did some other catching up. I've been getting back into anime, and I watched this one anime, which I'm not sure if anyone's heard of, called Chainsaw Man, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a fantastic series. It's really going in some very interesting directions. It doesn't feel like your typical shonen, like superhero main character, the best kind of series. I really like it. For those of you who have been living under a rock like I was, well, to be fair, I knew about Chainsaw Man, just never got to it. Chainsaw Man essentially follows our main character, Denji, who is essentially accompanied by a chainsaw devil for the most part, as we live in a world where devils kind of exist. They are real life threats to the world, and it kind of works on this concept that the more a concept is feared, the stronger its devil counterpart will be, which is a very interesting one, because when you look at the very essence of a chainsaw, well, how powerful would a chainsaw devil be? And then you can obviously think about, well, what would in theory be a dangerous or strong devil for the most part? You know, how deep does it go? What can actually be conceptualized as a physical embodiment of fear, and a demon for that matter? And they do some pretty clever things with it. I do really like a lot of the themes and kind of the ideas that the series is presenting regarding the main character, who is not necessarily your, you know, typical badass special character. He's not a very mature character. He's very young. He's very new to the world, without spoiling too much. You know, you have another character who's very much in the same. They kind of are two peas in a pod for the most part. And other characters kind of seem to be the adults or the, you know, babysitters to some extent. And I do kind of like that dynamic. The animation is fantastic. I can't remember who did the animation as of right now, but they did a fantastic job. And yeah, I definitely want to start reading the manga. I'll read it in between waiting for season 2 when that eventually comes out. But yes, no, if you have not watched Chainsaw Man, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun, especially if you want to see something that is a little bit more story focused and not, let's say, your typical like Naruto, One Piece kind of stuff. So yeah, highly recommendations from me. First trailer we have, sticking with anime, and that is going to be the first official trailer for Delicious in Dungeon, which is a new anime series which will be airing, I believe, from January next year. So we don't have long for this. And yeah, this is honestly one of my most anticipated series is for next year, next to Konosuba getting its 3rd season, Panty and Stocking season 2, and now we have this series. I mean, I'm going to be eating really good in 2024 at this rate, given what is scheduled to be happening. And yeah, this series is like the perfect example of sometimes the best idea being the simplest idea, because at its core, it is a fun story about fantasy characters doing fantasy things, and they eat food. It is $1 million idea, and it works so well. Like, obviously, if you've watched the trailer, which will obviously be in the download link in the description, you can see it's, you know, not trying to be anything super crazy. You know, you have very typical looking characters, like you have a guy in an armor, we have an elf, we have a dwarf, we have dragons, we have monsters. It's not trying to be something super crazy and amazing. It's just focusing on what it is and doing that well from what I know of the series, and I give it absolute props for that. Trigger Studios is doing the animation for this series, and they are the best choice. They've done things like Gurren Lagann, Kill la Kill, trying to think of some brand new animal, Cyberpunk Edge Runners. That was one of the last things they did. I think they were, like I said, the best choice for this series, as they excel when it comes to scale, as we see like the characters up against like giant monsters running for their lives. We really get a good sense of like their animated fear and like desperation as they attempt to flee. It's a visually it's a funny cue when you see the main character, I can't remember his name right now, he's holding one of the other characters on his back and they're just running for their lives and you know, there's a great sense of emphasis when, like, you know, they're running on top of things or running away from things. It really does work, and a lot of the characters look spot on from their manga design, which I really like, as Trigger is kind of able to kind of add those varied expressions into the series with them having certain, you know, reactions or whatever. I really like how it looks. Even the color palette is very reminiscent to the more colored illustrations that the manga books have. So yeah, I have high praise for this series. As it stands with animes, and without spoiling the series, because I am currently reading the manga, so I will not say. I've probably read what will be season 1 for the most part. Marcelli is the best girl. I believe that's how you say her name. It's spelled Marcille. See, I don't know if it's, you know, the Western way of saying that name, or she has like a slight twang on it. I don't know. Yeah, she's the best girl for now. But I've seen other characters that rival her position as of right now. But yeah, I am really looking forward to this series, and hopefully you guys are too. I think it's going to be a really fun one. I think it could be the next big anime in terms of the one that everyone's raving about. You see fan art of, and everyone buys the manga books, and all that kind of stuff. It gets toys, that kind of spiel for the most part. The next trailer we have, moving more back into live action, and this is where we're going to get a bit seasonal. We have Silent Night, which is essentially a return of John Woo, legendary director John Woo, doing, I guess, what he does best with a sort of revenge, action-packed film that kind of takes place during the Christmas season, kind of, although the time frame is a bit weird because it is implied that, how should you put it? So obviously what happens in the trailer is, the father has his son is unfortunately killed due to gangsters, gang warfare, whatever it may be, during Christmas time, yet he unfortunately gets shot, he loses his voice, and then gets revenge on these people, and all kind of takes place within the December Christmas time, which does bring up some questions which we'll get into. But yeah, a lot of filmmakers today owe a lot to John Woo, mainly the directors of the John Wick franchise. It's good to see him back though. It's going to be interesting to see like one of the masters of the action film and like the craft on that, or I should say that craft kind of return in an age where everyone is doing, the badass gets revenge trope. It's a genre he pioneered. So is he going to add anything new to it? Is it just going to feel like a classic film for the most part? I mean, these are the real questions. Like, does John Woo still have it? And will it stand out against other films in the genre? Because I mean, we already have a lot of films like this coming out already. We had Sisu earlier this year, which everyone really liked. We have another film, The Beekeeper, which is very similar. I'm not talking about it on the podcast because it looked boring. And then we have this. I think we had John Wick not too long ago as well. So we have a lot of these kinds of films. So yeah, does it stand a chance is what I'm going to be interested to see, both financially and critically. Are people going to care? Is it too late for, another one? Is the genre getting stale? This is what I find interesting about the film for the most part. Making the main protagonist silent was an odd choice. Because comparing it and going back to me saying, is this film going to stand out against others? It feels like a gimmick. Like, oh, what hasn't been done? Silent character? Christmas? And then they kind of just went with that on that premise. I mean, from what I can see, the fact that he is silent isn't really adding anything to it other than, I guess, maybe making him scary to some extent, although the trailer does confirm that he can kind of make some kind of noises with his throat. I mean, if you lose your vocal cords or whatever, you still can produce a breath-like sound for the most part, but obviously that's not really intimidating if you're just panting like a dog, so to speak. But yeah, it's weird. It's not really doing anything with that concept, and maybe the trailer will, but right now it's just, that fact could have been removed from the film, to be honest. Yeah, so my biggest question with this trailer was he always a badass, or did he simply train hard within the space of a month and just become a badass? Or is this like an over time kind of thing? Like, did losing his voice enhance his senses to some extent? Like, because he can't talk, he can see better, he can shoot fast, he can move better. Because typically when people do lose their senses, there's like this weird unexplained phenomenon that happens within biology and the human race, where, let's say, if you were to lose your eyesight, your hearing gets better, or you perceive sound better, for example. Is that what's going on and what they're implying? Who knows? The CGI looks really cartoony. It's very apparent in the shot where the car flips over. It basically looks really fake, and it didn't help the fact that I think they picked like a very like red or orange looking car, so it looks even worse for the most part. And yeah, why is Kid Cudi in this film? Like, I really don't know why a lot of these rappers and music artists keep popping up in films and media. I understand they want to, bridge themselves, not just be known as an artist, and I'm sure their producer or handler or whatever is, oh yeah, you should get into acting, and obviously it keeps them relevant, brings them attention, boosts the film. But given what's happened with the artist known as The Weeknd and the show he produced and made, I think a lot of music artists should probably stay away from TV and film for a while, in my personal opinion. But yeah, moving more onto the horror side and moving into next month, or what will be a big thing for people, mainly in America, next month, that's going to be the next trailer we have, which is Thanksgiving. Now, this is a kind of interesting one, once again. I mean, sure, it looks like stupid fun to some extent, and maybe that's the point, because the characters in this trailer that we see are annoying teens glued to their phones that honestly seems like they deserve to die. That in of itself is an interesting and fun concept, but the base premise basically seems to be that there's like a sleepy town and there's a serial killer going around who's killing people during Thanksgiving, and that's kind of the premise. I mean, it is very gimmicky, but a lot of horror films are very gimmicky, so I'm not going to scrutinize it on that. Yeah, basically it's I Know What You Did Last Summer / Scream, but for the TikTok generation. So if you like Netflix's Wednesday, you're probably really going to like this film, because it seems like that's the kind of target audience they're going at, is 14-year-olds who liked Wednesday and got scared by it. This will probably be their first slasher horror film, or they've heard about films like Scream, or they found, Halloween and Friday the 13th boring because it looks bad and all that kind of stuff. That kind of seems where they're going for it. The kills, I will say, are pretty savage. The killer clearly wants people to suffer before they die, which is kind of refreshing. I'm honestly sick of like quick, weightless, clean kills in horror and thriller films. Like, because there's this weird, like, I was about to say narrative. There's this weird idea where a lot of horror films, because they don't necessarily sell well or make a lot of money because they're usually 15 or 18 plus, children can't see it. So when they sanitize a horror film, as we've seen with lots released in recent years, it means that more children and more people are going to see it, which means they maximize their profit. So obviously you can't get too grotesque. That's why, if you've ever noticed, you've seen in horror films, when someone gets killed by a killer, it's usually just like a quick, stab, for example, and then they're dead and they fall over. The most you'll get is blood. But yeah, the killer is a real psychopath with a twisted sense of humor. I mean, like, cooking a woman alive in an oven like a turkey is pretty funny and honestly really brutal for the most part. I think she's like handcuffed or chained into the oven, which is elaborate, but like, damn, that's when you know you fucking hate somebody. But yeah, that being said, at the same time as well, other than that, the kills are not very creative. I mean, just shoving those things you use to keep corn on the cobs into someone's ear and freezing someone and just like chopping them. It's fine. Maybe they ran out of ideas. They weren't really sure how they incorporate the theme of Thanksgiving into a themed serial killer. I don't know. It's very strange for the most part. And also, the one line in the trailer where, I'm guessing it's a police officer, where he says, every weapon he's using is straight off a Thanksgiving table. Like, did they really need to spell it out for the audience? And also, he said he, which basically confirms that the killer is a female. That is a trope they've been doing from the 90s when they want to try and throw you off who the killer is. They will adamantly say, the killer is he. He's doing this. He's on the run. Oh no, he's coming. They will always do that. And besides, when you look at the frame of the killer is not a big, bulky, Jason Voorhees looking guy. It's a very slender, slim figure. Sure, it could be a young man or a young teen, but it's most likely a woman for the most part. And that would make sense, because given how everyone is always trying to push this certain narrative of women this, men not that, it would make sense for them to go, oh, you didn't see the serial killer was a woman. But we will see. I will be very surprised if it's not a woman for the most part. But yeah, like, the killer looks way too on the nose, speaking of which. Like, they are desperately trying to make this character or killer the next Michael Myers, and it's not working because Michael Myers is simple. This is just like a character, like I said. And to us in England, the killer just looks like Guy Fawkes or V for Vendetta, so it's very confusing when I look at this character. Yes, I know it's a pilgrim, and yes, I know that V for Vendetta is based off Guy Fawkes, who himself is based on / inspired by a pilgrim, before anyone gets, uppity about me knowing things in history, okay? It's funny how last year for the discussion when we were talking about pitching horror films, I came up with a Thanksgiving horror film. And now we have this. But honestly, my idea sounded better than this, and mine was more original. But hey, who knows? This could be a fun film. Every now and then we'll get something that actually is fun. Maybe they're not taking themselves too seriously. I kind of hope. And to be honest, the film is somewhat well acted, it's well shot, and there is some level of creativity to it, so I can honestly see it doing quite well in the box office for the most part. So yeah, I don't know. I might give it a watch if it does get released over here. And the last trailer we have is strictly a sort of horror film, although it's debatable because it could come across as a comedy to some extent, because most horror is comedy now based on how bad it is going to be for Night Swim. Another trailer from Blumhouse / Universal. And yeah, they really want us to forget about The Exorcist Believer that quickly. For quick context, that film came out and it did not review well, and it bombed at the box office because no one wanted another Exorcist film, and it was very apparent what they were trying to do with this film. It is pandering. It is nostalgia bait, and no effort was put into it besides, from what I've heard, some performances in the film. But besides that, we have Night Swim, which I really appreciate the fact that this trailer is just a shortened scene from the film that established the concept very well. Which is fine. I do like it, and horror films are kind of good at that. I just hope that this scene, or the scene that is the trailer, link in the description and download link, isn't like the best part of the film. Hopefully it's like the first kill or whatever. The moment I saw James Wan's name, I just laughed, to be honest. Like, from the producer of Nun, that's how they're bigging him up. Like, is that like the best / nicest thing you could say about him? Like, I know he's made better films for like your rivals, but damn, you're really underselling him. Like, sure, his last few films have been like hot trash, but you could have at least highlighted a better one, or, referred to him as like the horror icon, horror master, James Wan or something. It's weird. And I mean, at this point, James Wan is just having fun. Like, he knows he's a big draw, he's not trying, and he simply wants to see what he can get away with at the end of the day. Because he's done films like Malignant, he's done, he did the Insidious series, he did Conjuring, he did Saw, the first one at least. So he's just having fun, and his films always had that kind of element, and this one, it just seems like, yeah, he's just, doing that. I mean, the idea is kind of neat and stupid. Yeah, a haunted, possessed swimming pool. This film honestly reminds me of Deadbed, The Bed That Eats, which is another horror film, which is stupid. And yes, it is about a bed that kills people. It just kind of has that same kind of energy. Obviously, this one is taking itself way too seriously. I mean, I don't think it looks particularly that good, obviously, because they didn't show too much. But it is going to be a hard sell, I think. Just, evil swimming pool that's going to eat you, like... I'm assuming there's some kind of monster in the pool somehow. Maybe the pool is a portal to hell. Who knows? Why is it situated in a pool? Is the creature or demon or whatever in the pool aquatic? Like, what's going on there? It's stuff that kind of does need answers, but at the same time doesn't, because when a horror film tries to explain itself, it does get a bit silly, but who knows? Who knows? Yeah. What would have been really scary? If the corpse from the Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, The Dead Man's Float, was in the pool. That would be truly horrifying. If you don't know what that is, and you're easily frightened, maybe don't look it up. But if you feel ballsy enough, yeah, look that up if you're not aware of it. And it's funny because while I was double checking the episode's name, pictures of the corpse were actually blurred on Google search, which was really interesting because that episode really traumatized people that bad that Google themselves or whoever have deemed that image of the corpse, not appropriate or triggering. And yes, having seen it, it is a very horrifying sight for a children's televised show. That's why I bring it up, and because it's Halloween, of course. But yeah, it's bizarre. I don't know. I don't really have high hopes for this film. I think Blumhouse is kind of oversaturating themselves right now. They've got too many films out at the moment, as well as, too many horror themed films. I mean, we've got, Exorcist Believer. We've got this. We've got the Five Nights at Freddy's film. And I think there's another film they're releasing quite soon. But I get it. For those of you who don't know, the reason why Blumhouse is able to make so many films and, still stay afloat is because they make films very cheaply. So that way they always technically make money back in some regard. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be this podcast. No discussion this time because I honestly didn't feel right doing a discussion just on my own because the discussion was more group oriented. We may have someone on the next podcast to help us out with the discussion or two. So we will see what happens. But something will happen that's super Halloween traditional for this podcast, themed for the most part. But yeah, we got the video of the episode, which is kind of Halloween themed to some extent, which is going to be Chemical Brothers with Live Again featuring Halo Maud. And although not a directly scary music video, conceptual wise, and when you really think about it, it is kind of a scary, frightening concept when you obviously watch the video and think about it on a deeper and more introspective level. And just also a great song. Chemical Brothers released their newest album, I can't remember what it's called, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and I've had it on repeat. I really enjoy it, and maybe you'll enjoy this song and the album. If you do so, listen to it. I want to thank everyone for listening to this podcast. Thank you for making it this far. I really appreciate it and your time. Like the episode, subscribe. That would really help out. Really want to grow this channel, and that would do awesome. I mean, I just really want more of an audience for the most part. So any support is welcome, is what I'm trying to say. And yeah, I guess I will end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you on the next podcast.